Welcome to the Playwrights Realm community programming. Thank you for joining us. We'd like to go through some essential information before we get started. Captions for this session have been enabled, so feel free to turn them on if needed. The Realm has an ongoing commitment to being an equitable, inclusive, anti-oppressive, and anti-racist organization. More information on our mission and values is available on our website. Those values extend to this virtual space. If at any time you experience something that is not in alignment with those values, please email us. If you incurred any caregiving costs to attend this webinar, you can get a reimbursement through our Radical Parent Inclusion Project. You'll receive a link to submit your request in the follow-up email to this event. Please submit questions for the panelists in the Q&A window. If there's time, the panelists will answer it at the end. If you see a question you also want answered, you can upvote it. If you have any technical issues or need to communicate an access need with the group, please do so in the chat. Enjoy today's session and stay tuned for upcoming programming.
Hi, everybody. I am Roberta Pereira. I am the Executive Director of the Playwrights Realm, she, her pronouns, and I'm the moderator for today's panel. So before we get started, I just want to take some time to acknowledge that the realm is located on the ancestral and unceded territories of the Lenape people. The occupation of this land is an ongoing harm that continues to impact Native peoples, cultures, and the communities. In addition to the land that we are physically occupying, the technology and equipment we're using consume resources that are based in other physical lands. We invite you all to research the native tribes of the land you occupy, and we are sharing a link in the chat that provides an easy way to start learning about this. We are committed to continuing to take meaningful steps forward and hope you will join us in this work. So before I ask our panelists to join us, I just want to remind everybody that we will have some time for Q&A. So you can use the Q&A button and put your questions in there. And you can upvote any questions that you're also interested in. We also have the event program is linked in the chat. And we're going to keep our chat open for this event. So if you have any comments about what is being said, if you want to uplift something, please don't hesitate to put it on the chat. So now I would love to invite our panelists to turn on their cameras and join us. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we go around doing some intros, I also want to acknowledge our partners, HowlRound. This panel is also being live streamed at HowlRound, and they've been incredible partners. We've done a series called Changemakers with them, and we have several panels that we've done around topics that relate to that. And so you can actually go check out our Changemakers page on HowlRound if you want to find out more. So first of all, I want to thank all our panelists for joining us today. I literally could not believe when you all said yes to do this. We are thrilled to have you here to hear more about your organizations. And so as a way of introduction, all your bios are in the program. People can check that out. But I want to get right to it because, the time is short. So I wanted to just go ahead and ask you all about your organizations and your collective, like how did you arrive at your current leadership structure? And actually, before I pass on to that, I just want to add one thing for some of our attendees that might not know that. The regular leadership structure in American theater tends to be an artistic director and an executive managing producing director, whatever you want to call that other. So sort of like an artistic leader and an executive leader. They're both co-leaders of organizations, and they respond to the board. I would say that is like the typical setup for in American theater. It was not always like this. A lot of this happened in the movement when they expanded regional theaters in America, but we don't need to get into that. So when we are talking about alternative models, we are talking that things that are different than this kind of co-leadership, artistic, administrative, sort of like side by side. And so I just wanted to state that. And now I just want to pass on to our panelists. Alyssa, maybe you can start us off, just chatting a little bit about your organization and the current model, and how did you arrive at its current leadership structure?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My internet's a little slow. I'm in Boston for the month, and so things are a little slow right now. So let me start off and apologize for that. But this happened very strangely. So I work with Avant-Garde Theater. We are a non-equity professional theater company right outside of DC. We service the whole DC metro region. That's Virginia and Maryland and DC. And I've been an actress, mild-mannered actress by day. And during COVID, our artistic director suddenly passed away. Was not expecting it. And it became known to a couple of us who were really involved that the board was considering closing down the theater company that's been around for over 30 years. And obviously I was devastated about the loss, and I was devastated at this notion of this theater company that had come to consider home was going under. 5 of us came together, director, actors, 3 actors, 2 directors, and we came together and put a business plan together and gave it to the board. It took them months to say, okay, we did this free of charge. We started pro bono because the theater was in dire financial straits. We were able to come together, get okay by the board, and get enough money to get us up and running again. And so we've been doing that ever since.
Bobby, why don't we go to you?
Hey everybody, my name is Bobby Bermea and I'm with Sojourn Theatre. We are a community engagement focused theater company. We've been around for about 22 years. For the vast majority of that time, Michael Rode was our artistic director, and it was, the company was kind of his vision, and we were always like kind of ensemble based, but not really. He was always just kind of like the main guy. And we have been, doing work all over the country, from like New York, Ohio, Texas, all over the place, really. Portland, Oregon, where I'm at, is where we were based for many years. And then when he left Portland, Sojourn became, we were like spread all over the country. Portland, Chicago, Seattle, New York, Arizona, DC area, California. And but Michael was still the artistic director for years and years. And then 2020 happened. Like 2022 was so impactful on everybody for so many different reasons. And Michael was one of those people, and he was like, well, I don't know if it's appropriate even for a theater company like ours to have a single white man as his leader, and maybe we should think about doing something different. And quiet as kept, a lot of us were not really for the idea, just because we'd always done it one way, and with Sojourn, like so many of us, like some of us, like myself, I've been around for 20 years with the company. And but like we had a lot of longtime members, and it was much more of a family. So it felt like we were different than this other, like the model that Roberta was talking about. But we all decided he was right, and we voted on it, and we're working on it, and we are still in the midst of this transition even as we speak.
Morgan.
Hi, yeah, so I am one of 3 co-artistic directors of the Wilma Theater, and then we have 1 managing director. The other co-artistic directors are James Imes and Yuri Urnov. And the 3 of us were invited by Blanka Ziska, who is one of the founding artistic directors, and she's Czech, and she invited us to do kind of an experiment, like a 4-year experiment that she did a big fundraising campaign for and called the Next Chapter. And the idea was that all 4 of us are directors, including Blanca, and that we would each lead a season. We'd kind of rotate, and then the other 3 would be supporting in that rotation. And she invited us to do that in, I think it was January 2020. So it was kind of before the pandemic and before a lot of things happened that we started, and then everything went virtual immediately. And it's only now that we're kind of more so back in person. So the experiment got a little skewed. We didn't quite get to do the dream of each artistic director getting to lead a season. And so now we're coming to the final year of this 4-year experiment, which is my lead year. And then after that, we're going to transition into a slightly different model that still has 3 co-artistic directors, but because Blanca has since stepped away and retired. And we're going to try doing it without the rotating part of it. So just truly 3 people leading together, maybe with focus areas. But we are kind of like finishing the experiment, analyzing the experiment, and figuring out what happens next all at the same time.
Amazing, Raz.
Hi, so yeah, I'm one of about 10 organizing leaders of the Flag Collective. Just a little bit about our history. We're kind of in our nascent years as an organization, only about 2 years old. And we started, most of us started as resident artists of The Flea, which is a off-Broadway company in New York. And in the summer and fall of 2020, the resident artists collectively organized to make some changes in The Flea, and due to a long ongoing conversation, The Flea discharged the resident artists. In the ensuing action, our group all decided we had a sort of choice whether to dissolve ourselves or to keep organizing and keep creating art with ourselves outside of the direct artistic sort of management of The Flea. And so as we're doing that, we decided that we wanted to try the experiment of a leadership circle, of dispersing and specifically democratic process in which all sort of decisions from artistic, managerial, financial are filtered through leadership who can provide expertise on those things, but also approved by everyone within the collective. And so I'm one of the co-chairs of the programming and production group, which is primarily responsible for the producing arm of the collective. But we also, what comprises of the leadership circle is two people each in charge of development, operations, media, marketing, and human and cultural culture of the collective. So it's been 2 years from there, and we're currently really in the midst of our first season doing that. So that's where we are right now.
I just wanted to highlight something that I thought was interesting, because both the Fled and Avant-Garde, it seems like it started from, there was a crisis, right? And then there were artists that banded together and said, what can we do? How do we respond to this crisis, right? And then took something to leadership and made that happen, which I think is an interesting connection there. And on the other hand,
Absolutely.
I think, yeah, and on the other hand, for the other ones, I think that for Wilma and Sojourn, it seems like there was another leader that wasn't, that lead was like a visionary leader, I guess both of them seem like it, that were like, what if we do something different? And then called in, right, this. So just interesting to me to think about the different ways that this could happen, which was fascinating in the response. I just want to talk a little bit more about, so I want to talk about the benefits. Like, what are the things that you all have found? And I will not call on people, you can just answer when you feel inspired, of the structure, what are things that you said, wow, like I didn't know could be this great, like this is something that I haven't experienced before. And obviously, going back to something that Morgan said, all of these are still experiments, like things are happening as we speak, right? So we understand that things are always changing, but I'm just curious to see what are the pluses that you found so far.
I mean, I'm happy to, I'm sorry, Morgan, and you can hear my dog in the background letting me know that she wants something. I'm going to ignore her. For us, I feel like the good parts have been, well, for learning how to produce, which Uphill had no idea, gives me definitely for all of us a moment of grace for producers everywhere. Especially coming from the actor, but I feel like it gives us opportunities to do the other work that we love and not feel like it's all on us to do one thing. We have a consensus model. We try to be thoughtful about how we come to decisions, but it definitely gives us an opportunity to do other things that are important to us and the others step in. So for those of us who want to continue working and doing other things, not just with this theater company, but in other ways, it allows us to do that.
I was just going to say that we've faced so many decision-making challenges that I was just really grateful I did not have to do by myself. And you can count on the wisdom of multiple people coming together. And sure, it takes a lot longer because you have to talk about everything, but it's a real comfort to feel confident about making the right choices together, to just have each other to lean on. And I think it also keeps us fresh in terms of our taste and our interests in the theater, because we're constantly challenging each other. Is that there are some aesthetic similarities between the three of us as artistic directors and things that we want to see on stage and that we value about theater. And then there are some things that we are just fundamentally have a different idea about. And I think that that's part of the benefit, is that you're pulling from three different brains in this case, and often more, because the collaboration expands beyond just these three people.
I would say similarly, just that there's four of us, and we each have our like bucket of responsibilities, and we're finding out that there's other stuff that kind of slip between the cracks of those buckets. But yeah, each of us brings just like different strengths and focuses, foci, something to the table. And something I think that is interesting is, it's like all of us are longtime members of Sojourn. Like we've all and because like Michael was the leader for so long, you kind of think that we're all seeing things the same way. But in fact, everybody's perspective is a little different from the person's next to us. Which is just, it really gives us more of a 360 view, a 360-degree view of what's going on in the theater company and where we want to go in the future.
I think I agree with everything that everyone's ever said about this, and just to also say that having a team with you who have the same individual stake in how the organization prospers is really useful. And having other individuals who know as much as you, who know what needs to be done, and you can talk about it and have a discussion is really, really fruitful. And I think, and the way that it trickles down is that we the 10 of us are making this sort of hour-to-hour situations, but having a larger collective who we know has a voice in it, it's also a very welcoming sort of thing, because it's very vastly different from my experiences working in other more traditional institutions, where you might not have always a direct voice to the decision makers. And so that's really exciting.
Yeah, so I thought it was interesting that it felt like there was a common thread about this idea of togetherness and the collective, and sort of like having many voices and also learning from your peers, right? What Bobby said is like, even though they had been together for a long time, it doesn't mean that they all thought the same. And you could be like, oh, I never thought about it like that, which was interesting. So now I want to ask the flip side of this question. What are the things that have been challenges that you found so far? And we mentioned some already, and like Morgan was mentioning how they already had to change a little bit the way that they've been doing things or they've been learning. But what are things that have been challenging and have been bumps on the road?
But just I mean, the same thing, right? Like trying to come to decisions together can prove really, really difficult. I mean, I don't think that's a shock to anyone, but coming to consensus when people feel really, really strongly about things and the conversations over that. And sometimes I feel like, I think all of us would feel like we want the theater to move ahead. When 5 of us came in together during the pandemic, during, Black Lives Matter, and how do we, and Me Too. So all of a sudden we're thrown into this, and we're also trying to take into consideration all these other things that are so important and rearrange, write new things, write new, not change the mission so much as, looking at contracts. What do our contracts say? What is our conflict resolution path? How do we make sure that every artist has one of those and that we feel like we're protecting them? It was just mind numbing. And so the amount of work to get done, when really you should be meeting in a retreat for a couple of weeks to sort of make sure that you're all on the same page about stuff, but you're like, I can't do that. I got to run a theater. So that's been really daunting.
Alyssa, you said something that I just want to talk about is the responsiveness aspect. And that's something that I found that's been difficult, is that when you have 1 or 2 people, specifically, we had an issue, after the Supreme Court sort of decision came out, some of us in the leadership wanted to do something about it, to create art. And when you have one person who can sort of divert the funds of the company or the collective, then it's easy. But having to go to other people and make sure that they've done their due diligence, it makes the responsiveness much more than a much longer and arduous process. And so that's an unfortunate thing, that we're still figuring out how to build in systems so that when things happen in the world that we as artists want to respond to and be a part of, that we can have a system in that helps speed up our the way that we sort of allocate funds and allocate manpower, without also betraying the whole reason why we have this leadership circle in the first place.
Yeah, one of the things that Alyssa mentioned, and actually I would say like everything about the leadership body, a lot of times the things that make it, the things that are the strengths, the things that are the benefits, a lot of times are also the things that become the obstacles, like making the decisions among the 4 different people. And a lot of times sometimes the decision will be like, is this a decision that the 4 of us can make on our own, or do we need to bring the rest of the company in on this decision as well? So it might even spread out from us. And then, it's like trying to turn a battleship around in the harbor, but something else that Alyssa mentioned was everybody like being there for everybody being there while, so that you could pursue other outside interests. And I would say one of the obstacles has been that a lot of us, and some of the issues for Sojourn are singular to Sojourn, in that, like I said, we are spread all over the country. Portland, Seattle, Montana, Ohio, Maryland, and that in itself is just, an obstacle to be overcome. And then both to make a living and to take care of yourself artistically, and also because how do you want to make your impact in the rest of the world? Like we all have a lot of other stuff going on, and figuring out how to navigate that time between the time that we're putting to our other projects and that time that we're putting into Sojourn, and then getting it to like like scheduling a meeting between the leadership body is really hard, because the four of us all have wildly different schedules, you know, you know, and God, I remember I used to complain about Zoom, and it's just like, it's the only thing that would make it possible, first of all. But I mean, like, just sometimes our schedules are wildly different, and there are times when I can be like Sojourn, and then there are other times when I'm in repertory with two other shows outside of the company, and I don't memorize lines as well as I used to, so that can be tough sometimes, just navigating priorities, I guess.
The leadership group at the Wilma meets once a week, so that's good. We just have it on the calendar, although sometimes we have to cancel it. But sometimes there'll be an agenda item that comes back and comes back and comes back, and we'll discuss it, maybe 3 or 4 times before we feel confident in making the next step. So it just really does take a lot more time. And then I think that we each maybe have different ideas of what issues are urgent or not. And so I think for me at the beginning, sometimes I felt like some things should be moving faster and had to kind of work with myself to let that go and move at the pace of the group. So I think that's been a challenge and like a learning curve with how this works. And then the other big challenge is budget, because we had this huge transformation fund that Blanca really took the lead on creating before she even invited us into this. And like, how are we going to sustain that? And how are we going to keep making work at the scale that we want to make at the Wilma, and have 3 artistic directors? So that's a question.
And actually, we had some great questions start coming in. And so I'm going to start answering some of those. So there are 2 questions about boards. So what we had from Juliet and from Claudia asking, how does each leader engage with your board of directors? And has the board evolved over, as these leadership models have evolved? And how do you negotiate differences with that board?
It's not easy. The board has not evolved. It's a board that's been around for many, many years, which means we had a relationship with the president. And so that was really helpful to sort of like help us get in. We try to meet with them. We have to do a budget or to share like that. Is something else we learned. Like we went to a meeting and we were there for an hour. And then afterwards I was like, there needs to be agenda. We want 20 minutes. These are the things we'll talk about. And then we're out of there. We don't need to be at a board meeting for that amount of time. But we also, somebody asked, I think, about the business plan that we utilized. And we went in saying that there's 5 of us. These are the different areas that we hope to cover, so that they could feel comfort in that, someone's handling PR and marketing, someone's handling some of the more auditioning and hiring, someone's handling, so that they felt that social media or hiring production staff, dealing with the theater in and of itself. So they began to feel like, okay, but honestly, now it's like, who has the time to do what? We've all sort of learned how to do, like, I never thought, you were so right, like how to be a producer. Whoa. But I have to say this, it can be incredibly rewarding when everybody, you hire good folk who don't need you and you move forward, and it's the most rewarding, wonderful thing in the world. And then other times it's really, really hard. It's really difficult.
Any other thoughts on board relationships specifically? How do you connect with your board? Has the board changed since the leadership structure has changed?
Our board has changed in terms of individuals. Like, there are a lot of people who Blanca had close relationships with, because she was the artistic director for something like 40 years. So she built these really close personal relationships. And now that there's 3 new people and our managing director, it just seems like we're kind of at the beginning of building these relationships again. And there's also some new people on the board. But I think that being on Zoom has made that kind of tricky, and we're trying for the first time this fall to have one in-person board meeting. Many of the board members I have yet to meet in person, so that's been a challenge. But I think at the moment it does feel like the board is on the same team as the artistic leadership, and we all have the same vision in mind for what we're trying to do, and they are supportive. So that seems like the right idea.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I feel like I don't have a particularly useful answer. Our board stayed pretty much the same, and we're trying to be, super transparent about everything that was happening with us. And they, I think, come along, and some of them are us. Some of the Sojourn is on the board. So and they, everybody's been aware of this transition and where we're at with it. So
I have a pretty relatively short answer to this, being that we don't currently have an executive board, but as we are planning on pursuing that in the within the next sort of season of our residency. And what we found is, the one thing I can offer, what we found is that there are a lot of people who will join, who are prospective, who can join boards, who, the sort of usual suspects, are pretty hesitant to sort of come on board for many reasons, but also because of a new sort of leadership model. So the task of explaining that to these folks, explaining how they can be successful, and how is something that we're actively dealing with as I speak.
Oh, that's very interesting. That could be a thing that people aren't used to. So there was another very interesting question too that we touched upon, but I would love to see if there's more about the economic models that the different companies and collectives use. So connected to that, this is a question that I have too. So first of all, has the question is actually about the leadership models. Has this extended into also experimenting a little bit with the traditional economic models of theater and how that works? But I also have a question about literally how that works, right? Because and Morgan, you touched on this, right? So suddenly you had one leader, right? So that person had X salary. Usually the executive artistic leaders usually have the highest salary in the companies, or one of the highest salary in the companies. And suddenly you're hiring a bunch of people to do this work. So how do you do this and still consider pay equity, for example? Bobby, you also mentioned the fact that a lot of your company members and collective members want to balance other work, right? So people are directing. So how do you balance that if somebody is working more in the theater and somebody's doing less? And how does that all work? How does the math work, the numbers work? Anything that you can share about that, I think will be very helpful.
I think that, so one thing that was designed is that with the lead artistic director, they're paid a full-time salary, and then with the other 2 supporting, depending where they are in the cycle, they're paid either 40% or 25%. So we have a tiered salary system, and that has worked well in that each of us are also freelance artists who want to make work outside, like Bobby was talking about, all over the place, and not be at the Wilma all the time, which is, I think, part of the idea, to make the job of the artistic director more artistically fulfilling and sustainable. It can go elsewhere. But then on the flip side of that, when it's difficult to actually work that little, if you're being paid for 25%, but you're also entitled, a co-artistic director and expected to take responsibility there's a dissonance there. So that's one of the things we're trying to address moving forward, and how the structure works. But that was the approach for, and I think that the full-time position also took a pay cut. So that was kind of how it was made to work originally.
Yeah, it's interesting because we have different buckets, like I think other people have mentioned. So like financial and development are paid a little bit more per month, and they're expected to put in a few more hours, and then company care and communications are paid like for like 10 hours a month, I think, and they're expected to do 10 hours worth of work. And then when we had like we just had a residency at a university, a workshop rather, and everybody who participates in that, they get paid for that gig. And it's interesting. I feel like theater industry wide, I felt like the pandemic was a great opportunity to like rethink the business model of theater, which doesn't feel entirely sustainable. But in that time we didn't, and when we came back, we are still looking for donors and writing grants to make the theater happen.
I would say that because we evolved from a resident artist company that was for the large portion of its history, unpaid artists, and then for a smaller portion, underpaid artists, pay equity was a big thing for how we were to figure out going forward. When we're doing productions and workshops and standard art, more sort of traditional artistic fare, we are paying everyone at a New York City minimum wage scale, which is more than some industry standard pay scales and less than others, depending on the project. As for administrative work and leadership work, we're piloting a sort of program where there's a sort of collective administrative fund, and any person in the collective who's done work for the collective is able to log hours into the fund and effectively pay themselves. And we're piloting this with the understanding that artists will, if there's an artist who wants to donate an hour to the collective and working because they just did like send a couple of emails or called a couple of potential donors, then they're able to. But if they want to give if they want to be a part of the collective in a kind of way, but they can't do it for a certain amount of money, then they can pay themselves. So this allows everyone to figure out how they can personally interact with the collective and with their own financial and it's with their own financial means in mind. And those things are sort of approved by a sort of two-step process, and then the hope is that we can audit that this experiment in payment each year to see if it's successful. Do we run out of money early? Are people, is an honor system something actually legitimate that people can sort of pay themselves out of? What is this collective ownership? Trying to really understand what collective ownership means in that way. So that's kind of how we're figuring out the finances. But once again, never going below New York City minimum wage. And our hope is to bring that to New York City surviving wage, which is a little bit more.
Raz, just a clarifying question this is very interesting, this project you're doing, the leadership, and I'm excited to hear how it turns out.
Yeah.
Is that also paid in the same rate? Is that also paid in the New York rate per hour?
Yes, it's paid at minimum wage. So
Got it.
yeah. So you can log whatever hours for 15 an hour.
But also the same, like you're paying the leadership and the artist, for example, the same rate right now.
Yeah, with the for now keeping it all flat.
Yeah.
And transparent. Every member of the collective has access to all of the financial information and all of the transactions, despite accepting, of course, personal information.
Any other comments about that, finances and all of that? We had a flurry of questions come in, so I'll turn over to those. So there's an interesting question about season planning and how that happens and how the organization arrives at programming. And there was a similar question that is related to that is about disagreement, but also who makes the final decision. So for me, this connects to the season programming, because you could arguably say that one of the most important things that an artistic leader does or artistic collective does is figure out what kind of work you're putting out there. And so I'm curious about that, and if there were any disagreements and how you navigate those.
Go ahead, Morgan. Sorry.
We had some. Well, because there's the lead artistic director that helps clarify who makes the final call on a decision, but we really didn't move forward with the selection of plays or artists without everybody agreeing. There were moments where certain people were more excited about something than others. Or, for example, we have this acting company, the Hot House Acting Company. And so maybe on the page, a play wasn't as exciting, but then when we heard the actors read it, it became exciting. So there was different phases along the way. But one major thing that I learned, because this is my first time curating a season, my background is as a freelance theater director. And also I ran a theater company and worked in admin, but I'd never curated a season before. It's hard to do it in this short of a runway with the rotating 1 year each, because it's really about building relationships, reading plays, but then, it's not quite the right time for it, or maybe the next draft is going to be it, and so to plug and play in that sort of a timeline was really stressful, honestly. And I think in our next iteration of shared leadership, we're going to try to build that runway longer so that there can be projects in development over many years, as well as projects that feel quite timely and come to our attention right in the moment. So making space for both things. But I think that if we came across a project that one person just really never got on board for, it didn't move forward. It was left behind.
I will have to uplift Morgan before we move on, that even with all these challenges, you all did get Fat Ham and Pulitzer winner, an incredible production that now I know you directed the original. So even with all those challenges, I think you all did pretty well.
Thank you for saying that. Maybe I'm being too negative. That is true. Through many challenges, we were able to. We did a filmed version of James Iams's play Fat Ham, which made it eligible for the Pulitzer. Yeah, so that
and
did
won.
come out. And won.
The play won, which was great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other thoughts about that, about season programming or disagreements within the leadership?
Well, it's interesting. With Sojourn, we don't actually do seasons like that. Like we don't plan okay, we're gonna do these 4 shows. Mainly because most of what we do is devised, and we have created it around a subject or an issue that has come up within the community, and our job is to go in and help that community engage in this complex and maybe difficult conversation. And so what we have right now is we have a catalog of Sojourn shows that have been built in this way that we can take to various cities But somebody earlier mentioned the word scale, and because of the pandemic, because of of inflation, we have had to think about the scale of some of these projects and how much they are like a traveling show, and how much we are a theater company, like and where this show can be much more flexible, and and how many of these bells and whistles does it actually need to communicate what we needed to communicate, and then we find people who want to do it.
I think Bobby brings up a really good point too. I don't think, not that it's not a fair question because of COVID, right? Like, so we're doing plays a lot of the time that we did plays when we were finally back out, plays that had been canceled, that had been closed, that we felt we had a commitment to doing before, right? And we wanted to make sure that we were able to do that. So we were able to do 2 the first season we were back. We were doing another one. But also when we were thinking about casts, we were thinking about very small casts because of COVID, because we wanted to make sure that for safety reasons, we didn't, we also had to have smaller audiences. So these were the sort of things, not just the artistic element and fitting in with our mission, but COVID really threw us for a loop in what we could and could not do, and to be thoughtful about season planning. And also, and so that might change in the future, but also in regard to funding institutions, to these, how the response, they have been incredible. Like, they really are excited about it. And the other thing I was going to say in regards to, we actually put in the budget, our budget, we went to the board for a consultant to help us be the best that we can be as a leadership model, because it is so hard sometimes. We are grown-ups, we want to be respectful of each other, and yet it's still very difficult sometimes to come to consensus. And we were like, you know what, we need somebody for the long haul to help us to do that. And I really feel strongly about putting something in your budget to get a consultant to come in and help for those folks who are having an issue and want to make it, to do the best that they can do.
Most of our projects come from within the larger body of the collective, but the thing that kind of really helps guide us when we're 10 different people who can have 10 different opinions on things is the pillars on which we started the collective on, and that being artistic development, innovative theatrical production, and community injustice. And so anytime a project comes forward, it's like, does this fulfill all 3 of those pillars, and in what ways? And that oftentimes, more often than not, helps guide us.
And we have another audience question too that Alyssa touched on, and it was about funding institutions. So how do the funding institutions receive that? Morgan, you also talked a little bit about the fund that was put in place before the model, but how was that conversation with your funders, and what happened there?
I mean, I feel like it's arts funding and everything, and I feel like they are aware of the zeitgeist and of the moment. And right now, if you have been around for a while and shown some sustainability, they appreciate the opportunity to take part in this sea change that is happening. Has been my experience so far.
Any other experiences with funding institutions? Okay.
I'll say that funding for us is hard. I think on the opposite side of what Bobby is saying is that no matter what your model is, whether it's traditional or non-traditional, newness is scary to funders. And when you only have 1 or 2 years of work under your belt, and that's the biggest thing that we felt so far in like bringing ourselves forward to the money people, is trying to leverage what we've done against our newness, which makes people nervous.
Yeah, I think at the Wilma, we do have institutional funding, but it's more for specific projects or programs and not so much for the shared leadership model, at least not yet. Then the other major piece of the puzzle is that for the past 2 years, we've received quite a lot of federal funding, like for shuttered venues and COVID-related, pandemic-related funding, which it has stopped. So I think we're one of many theaters that have been affected by that. There's this chunk of money missing.
And there was also a question about how the staff received the new model. So we haven't talked as much about the rest of the staff. So how was that? How did that work?
Well, for Sojourn, the new leadership body is the staff. And everybody was in on that decision. And a lot of times we're doing what everybody else didn't want to do. So they're all good with it.
I think it was a bit challenging for some of the staff because it took the new leadership team some time to kind of like find our rhythm and be able to articulate a shared vision. We planned to go on a retreat after we started, and then the pandemic happened and we never went on a retreat. So there was like, there were some sticky starting moments, and I think we're in a better place now and have more clarity and better transparency and communication about how decisions are getting made. And there's notes that go out to the entire staff after each leadership meeting. The acting company, the Hot House acting company, has also taken on a shared leadership model. So they have a rotating group of leaders, but shared leadership has not yet trickled down to the rest of the organization. So we still have a structure where there's a department head, and then there are junior staff reporting to the department head. So that's just kind of like an interesting imbalance. It's been described as top heavy, but it's something that we're looking at, the organizational structure.
I think we have time for one final question. So Carrie is saying that they're happy that all the panelists are still pursuing the art. And so basically, and we've touched on this too, I think Bobby, you mentioned this in one of your answers. How do you balance those priorities? So how do you continue to direct, act, write, create, either in your organization or collective or outside of it, and be involved, as a co-artistic director or whatever the different title is? So how does that work? How do you make that all work?
Well, for us, we take turns, and whoever is in something or directing something, or then the rest of us fill in for them. So it's because we know that if we fill in for them, others will fill in for us. I mean, that's just part of our gig that we do that. So we also, when we're doing a show, one of the producing partners becomes the person that the staff need to talk to. It's too confusing. It's very fragmented if they had to go to 4 different leaders. So we'll say like, hey, I want to handle this show. I'm happy to be the point person for Julius Caesar. Let me be the person that handles that particular one. And people can come to me for any issues. Doesn't mean we don't have our 2-hour, as Bobby was saying, online meetings where we're discussing everything. But because it's not fair to them to have, it's to have 4 bosses sounds ridiculous. It's really hard.
That's what I was gonna say. You know what, Carrie? It's hard. It's hard. Yeah. And I think we're still learning how to navigate. It was like somebody earlier asked about, have you ever had disagreements? I would say it's over that. But it's like with Sojourn also, again, a singular problem to our company is that we're so much like a family, and the dynamic is, family-like, which can be both harder and easier because you feel like you can talk to this person, but you're also more willing to be like just be mad at them instead of like solve this in a professional way. But I think, kind of like what Alyssa was saying, like you just take turns and you try and be there when the other person needs you.
Yeah, that's very much why we sort of decided on the sort of leadership model for us for each sort of area of expertise is we're recognizing that all 10 of us are working artists as well. And so I'm a freelance director as well. And so when I'm in a show, my co-chair, Adam Coy, is taking over, some of the day-to-day and vice versa. So that's kind of how we and then of course the challenge is making sure that the collective knowledge, our two collective brains stay connected, even though one of us is sort of in and more out.
Anything else to add? Final words? I just wanted to really thank our panelists. This is for also approaching this with such openness and being really transparent. Talking about some difficult things like, dealing with family, basically, finances, board, all of those things. Like, it's very complicated, but I think it is an exciting time where we are, we have an opportunity here to reinvent some models, as we mentioned before, that maybe were not working out very well. So I think that conversations like this really help, and learning from people that are doing it. And I can't wait, like in a year or so, to have another panel with all of you and hear how it's going and hear everything that has happened, because I think that'll be very exciting. But I want to thank all the panelists. I want to thank all our attendees, everybody at HowlRound. Thank you so much for joining us. And this is actually our final community event program for the season for the Realm. So thank you for people that came to several of them. If you go to our YouTube page or the HowlRound Changemakers page, we actually have a lot of the different panels that we've done around issues of anti-racism, of new models in theater. So I encourage everybody to check those out. This video is going to be there as well. So if you know anybody that missed it, please send them the link. And just thank you all for your time, and I really appreciate it. Bye-bye.
No cigarette in the waiting room, only chairs and magazines, and a printed stack of papers that the nurse says you should read. Tell me again, what is your name? What is your date of birth? Are you alone? Are you in pain? Are you related to her? Insurance is a nightmare, 'cause there are no guarantees. Wearing black on Sunday, we're going to the beach. They don't teach you that in school, how to laugh your trouble